They called her just a janitor, another invisible face pushing a mop cart through the sterile corridors of Meridian Defense Technologies. But when Maria Santos rolled up her sleeve that Tuesday morning, the intricate tattoo that emerged would shatter everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman who cleaned their offices. What they saw etched in black ink wasn't just a design, it was a roadmap to one of the military's most classified operations, and proof that sometimes the most dangerous warriors hide in plain sight. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Maria Santos guided her cleaning cart down the polished hallway of Meridian Defense Technologies corporate headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. At 34, she moved with an economy of motion that most people mistook for the weary shuffle of someone resigned to menial work. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her navy blue janitorial uniform bore the standard company logo. Nothing that would make anyone look twice, but those who paid attention might have noticed that Maria's posture was too perfect for someone who supposedly spent her days hunched over cleaning supplies. Her eyes swept each room she entered with the methodical precision of someone conducting reconnaissance, and her hands, calloused in places that had nothing to do with mopping floors, handled her equipment with a familiarity that spoke of muscle memory developed elsewhere. Maria had been working the night shift at Meridian for 8 months, arriving each evening at 10 p.m. when the last of the engineers and project managers finally headed home. She preferred the solitude of empty offices, the quiet hum of computers left running overnight, and the absence of curious stares or condescending small talk. During the day, she attended community college classes, ostensibly working toward a degree in business administration. Her professors saw a dedicated student who never missed assignments despite working full-time. Her classmates saw an older woman who kept to herself, probably trying to better her situation through education. None of them knew that Maria Santos wasn't her real name, the woman who checked in each night with building security and methodically cleaned 17 floors of one of the Pentagon's most important defense contractors had once been Captain Maria Vasquez, 75th Ranger Regiment, United States Army. For 6 years, she had led classified missions in places that didn't officially exist, protecting assets and eliminating threats that the public would never hear about. Her specialty had been deep reconnaissance and direct action in denied areas, the kind of operations where failure meant more than just mission failure. It meant international incidents and congressional hearings, but that life had ended too. Years ago in the mountains of Afghanistan, when a routine extraction had gone catastrophically wrong. 3 of her team members had died covering her retreat, and Maria had emerged from that valley carrying classified information that made her more valuable to enemy intelligence services than almost anyone else in the military. The Pentagon solution had been elegant in its simplicity. Captain Maria Vasquez died in that valley, officially listed as killed in action alongside her teammates. The woman who walked out of Walter Reed Medical Center 6 months later was Maria Santos, complete with a new identity, new background, and new life. The transition had been brutal. Going from commanding elite soldiers to pushing a mop cart felt like emotional waterboarding. But Maria understood the necessity. Too many people wanted the information in her head, and the only way to keep it safe was to become someone so ordinary, so invisible, that no one would ever think to look for a decorated Army Ranger behind the tired eyes of a night janitor. She had chosen Meridian Defense Technologies deliberately. The company's work on advanced communication systems meant she could keep her finger on the pulse of military technology while maintaining her cover. Her security clearance had been officially revoked when Maria Vasquez died, but her knowledge remained intact. As she cleaned the offices of engineers and project managers, she absorbed conversations about classified programs, noticed security vulnerabilities, and occasionally found herself silently correcting technical mistakes she overheard during late night meetings. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same building she now cleaned contained 3 separate projects, She had personally field-tested during her time with the Rangers. The experimental communication systems that had kept her team alive during countless missions were being refined and improved just floors above her head by people who would never know they were working on equipment that had been baptized in combat. Maria's routine was as precise as her former military operations. She started each shift on the 17th floor, working her way down through executive offices, conference rooms, and laboratory spaces. She knew which offices stayed late, which employees left sensitive documents on their desks, and which security cameras had blind spots. This knowledge served no particular purpose in her current life, but habits formed under fire don't disappear just because the threat environment changes. The building's night security team had grown comfortable with her presence. James Mitchell, the senior guard, always nodded politely when she passed the front desk. Sarah Chun, who worked the monitoring station, occasionally asked about her classes at Northern Virginia Community College. They saw a hard-working woman trying to improve her circumstances, someone who deserved respect for her dedication, even if her current job wasn't prestigious. What they didn't see were the subtle signs that Maria carried her past like invisible armor. The way she positioned herself near exits in every room she entered. How her cleaning cart was organized not just for efficiency, but for quick access to tools that could serve multiple purposes. The fact that she had memorized the building's entire layout, including service corridors and emergency exits that weren't marked on any publicly available floor plan. Her apartment in nearby Fairfax was as carefully constructed as her identity. The furniture was secondhand but clean, the kind of pieces someone on a janitor's salary might accumulate over time. Her bookshelf contained community college textbooks, popular novels, and a few cookbooks. But hidden behind a false panel she had installed herself was a different collection: tactical manuals, classified after-action reports that she wasn't supposed to possess, and detailed psychological profiles of enemy operatives who might still be hunting for Captain Maria Vasquez. The most dangerous item in her apartment wasn't a weapon, though she had those too, carefully hidden and maintained, but a small notebook filled with her own handwriting. It contained operational details from missions that were so classified they didn't appear in any official records. Information about asset networks, enemy capabilities, and strategic weaknesses that could compromise ongoing operations if it fell into the wrong hands. This was the notebook that made her valuable enough to kill and invisible enough to protect. Maria's social life was as carefully managed as everything else. She attended community college classes where she was friendly, but not memorable. She shopped at the same grocery stores, ate at the same modest restaurants, and maintained the lifestyle that Maria Santos, night janitor, would logically live. Occasionally, she caught herself almost slipping using tactical terminology in casual conversation or demonstrating knowledge that Maria Santos shouldn't possess. But she had learned to catch these moments before they revealed anything significant. The loneliness was the hardest part. Maria Vasquez had been part of something larger than herself, surrounded by teammates who understood the weight of what they carried. Maria Santos was alone by design, isolated from anyone who might recognize the warrior hiding behind the janitor's uniform. She attended her teammates' funerals disguised as a distant family friend, watching from the back as their families grieved heroes whose full stories could never be told. But she had found purpose in her new life, even if it wasn't the purpose she had trained for. The information she gathered during her cleaning rounds occasionally found its way to anonymous tips sent to security departments. Vulnerabilities she noticed were reported through channels that couldn't be traced back to her. She couldn't serve her country as Captain Maria Vasquez anymore, but she could still serve as Maria Santos, protecting people who would never know. They needed protection. The work itself had become a form of meditation. The repetitive motions of cleaning, the quiet hours spent moving through empty spaces, the satisfaction of leaving each room better than she found it. These simple tasks provided a structure that helped keep the memories at bay. during the day. Nightmares about Afghanistan could wake her in a cold sweat. But at night, pushing her cart through familiar corridors, she found a peace that had eluded her since leaving the military. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maria's handler, a CIA operative who knew her only as Asset 779, checked in monthly through coded messages left in dead drops around Arlington. The meetings were brief and professional, confirmation that her cover remained intact, updates on threats that might require her to relocate, and occasionally, requests for specific information that only someone with her background could provide. These contacts were her only connection to her former life, and she treasured them even as they reminded her of everything she had lost. As she finished cleaning the executive conference room on the 10th floor, Maria allowed herself a moment to look out at the lights of Washington, D.C. stretching into the distance. Somewhere in that maze of government buildings, people were making decisions that would affect operations like the ones she used to lead. Soldiers were preparing for missions similar to the ones that had defined her career. And she was here, invisible and forgotten, protecting secrets that could get them all killed if they were ever revealed. The cleaning cart's wheels squeaked slightly as she pushed it toward the elevator, a sound that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Tomorrow night, she would return to these same floors, clean these same offices, and maintain the careful balance between visibility and invisibility that kept her alive. It wasn't the life Captain Maria Vasquez had planned, but it was the life that Maria Santos had learned to accept. What she couldn't accept, what she couldn't have predicted, was that her carefully constructed anonymity was about to be shattered by the cruelty of people who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to their own sense of superiority. The storm that was building would test every skill she had learned as a ranger, but it would also offer something she hadn't experienced in 2 years, the chance to stand and fight. Instead of hiding in the shadows, the elevator doors closed with a soft chime, carrying Maria and her secrets down to the next floor, where her real story was about to begin. The trouble started with Bradley Hutchinson, and like most bullies, he announced his presence before anyone asked for it. At 28, Bradley was Meridian Defense Technologies' youngest senior systems analyst, a title he wore like armor against his own insecurities. His corner office on the 14th floor displayed his MIT diploma prominently, along with awards from various tech conferences and a photograph of himself shaking hands with a Pentagon official whose name he dropped in every conversation. Bradley arrived at work each morning in his silver BMW, parking in a space technically reserved for visitors but claimed, through the aggressive entitlement that had carried him through private school, an Ivy League education, and 3 promotions in 4 years. His colleagues tolerated his arrogance because his technical skills were undeniable, and his connections within the military-industrial complex made him valuable to the company's bottom line. But tolerance wasn't the same as respect, and Bradley's constant need for validation had created a reservoir of resentment that he projected onto anyone he perceived as beneath him. The first time Bradley noticed Maria, she was emptying the waste basket in his office while he worked late on a classified communications protocol. Something about her presence irritated him, perhaps the way she moved with quiet efficiency, or how she seemed to focus intently on her work rather than being impressed by his obvious importance. When she accidentally knocked over a pen holder while dusting his desk, his reaction was swift and disproportionate. "Jesus Christ, watch what you're doing," he snapped, not bothering to look up from his monitor. "Some of us are working on projects that actually matter." Maria had simply apologized, cleaned up the scattered pens, and continued her work. But her lack of visible reaction to his verbal assault registered as defiance in Bradley's mind. He was accustomed to immediate deference. From service staff apologies, promises to be more careful, acknowledgement of his superiority. Maria's calm professionalism felt like a challenge to his authority. Over the following weeks, Bradley began to orchestrate increasingly petty confrontations. He would schedule phone calls during Maria's cleaning time, speaking loudly about classified projects while shooting meaningful glances in her direction, as if her presence violated some unspoken security protocol. He started leaving messes, deliberately coffee spills that needed immediate attention, papers scattered on the floor, food containers that required special disposal. Each mess came with a snide comment about attention to detail or professional standards. "I hope you understand how sensitive this environment is," Bradley would say, watching Maria clean up spills he had created moments before her arrival. "We can't have people here who don't appreciate the importance of what we do." Maria's responses remained consistent: quiet acknowledgement, efficient cleanup, and professional distance. She never argued, never complained, never gave Bradley the confrontation he seemed to crave. This restraint only increased his frustration. In his experience, authority was meaningless unless it produced visible submission, and Maria's unruffled competence felt like an indictment of his own importance. The harassment escalated when Bradley discovered that Maria attended community college during the day. He had overheard her politely declining overtime work because of a morning exam, and this information became ammunition for his increasingly creative cruelty. He began scheduling unnecessary emergency cleanings during times he knew conflicted with her class schedule, forcing her to choose between her education and her employment. "Sorry to interrupt your busy academic career," he would say with practiced sarcasm, "but those of us with real jobs need this office cleaned immediately." Bradley's campaign against Maria was enabled by the toxic culture that had developed in Meridian's technical divisions. The company's rapid growth and lucrative government contracts had attracted brilliant minds, but also fostered an environment where technical expertise was valued above basic human decency. Engineers and analysts competed ruthlessly for recognition, and the support staff who kept their work environment functional were treated as invisible obstacles rather than essential colleagues. Dr. Amanda Reeves, the division's technical director, was too focused on project deadlines to notice the harassment occurring in her department. She was a brilliant engineer who had risen through the ranks by delivering results, but her leadership style prioritized technical excellence over personnel management. When the rare complaint about workplace behavior reached her desk, she typically delegated it to human resources with instructions to handle it quickly and quietly. The Human Resources Department, led by Robert Thorne, operated under the assumption that their primary function was protecting the company from liability, rather than protecting employees from abuse. Thorne had spent 15 years in corporate, and his experience had taught him that complaints from low-level employees were usually exaggerated grievances that disappeared if ignored long enough. Besides, Bradley Hutchinson's technical contributions and Pentagon contacts made him nearly untouchable within the company hierarchy. This environment gave Bradley increasing confidence in his harassment campaign. When Maria arrived for her shift, she often found her cleaning supplies tampered with diluted solutions that wouldn't clean properly, equipment moved to inconvenient locations, supplies deliberately depleted just before she needed them. Bradley would watch from his office window as she dealt with these obstacles, his satisfaction evident in the way he smiled when she had to make multiple trips to the supply closet. "Having trouble with the job requirements?" he would ask with mock concern. "Maybe you should consider career options that better match your capabilities." The psychological warfare was deliberate and systematic. Bradley had studied Maria's routine with the same analytical precision he applied to technical problems, identifying vulnerabilities and pressure points that would maximize her stress without creating obvious evidence of his involvement. He knew she attended classes on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, so he scheduled unnecessary urgent cleaning tasks for Monday and Wednesday, nights that would keep her working past her normal shift. He discovered that she took pride in the quality of her work, so he began leaving passive-aggressive notes about areas that needed more attention, often in spaces that had been cleaned perfectly. Maria's response to this escalating harassment remained professionally composed, but the strain was beginning to show in subtle ways that only someone with her training would recognize as warning signs. Her jaw would tighten almost imperceptibly when she found her supplies moved or contaminated. Her hands would pause for a fraction of a second longer than necessary when Bradley delivered his verbal assaults. Her breathing would shift into the controlled pattern she had learned during combat stress training, a technique for maintaining focus under extreme pressure. But what Bradley couldn't see, what none of his colleagues understood, was that Maria's calm wasn't submission, it was reconnaissance. Every incident was cataloged in her memory with the same precision she had once applied to enemy behavior analysis. She noted patterns in his harassment, identified witnesses who observed his behavior, and began documenting incidents with the methodical approach that had once made her one of the Army's most effective intelligence operatives. The other employees in Bradley's division were aware of his treatment of Maria, but their responses ranged from uncomfortable silence to active encouragement. Some genuinely disapproved of his behavior, but lacked the courage to intervene. Others found his casual cruelty entertaining, a source of office drama that broke up the monotony of technical work. A few seemed to view his harassment as justified, an appropriate response to what they perceived as Maria's failure to show proper deference to her intellectual superiors. Jennifer Walsh, a junior engineer who shared Bradley's educational background, but not his social confidence, often watched these interactions with visible discomfort. She had tried once to intervene when Bradley was berating Maria over a cleaning schedule conflict, but his verbal response had been so vicious that she never attempted to help again. Instead, she dealt with her guilt by avoiding any situation where she might witness further harassment. "It's not really our business," she would tell herself, focusing intently on her computer screen when Bradley's voice rose in the hallway. "HR knows how to handle these situations if there's really a problem." The maintenance staff who worked alongside Maria were equally powerless to intervene. Tom Rodriguez, the day shift supervisor, had 20 years of experience in corporate cleaning services, and he recognized the signs of workplace harassment immediately. But he also understood the practical realities of their situation. Custodial staff who complained about mistreatment by professional employees typically found themselves unemployed, and Maria needed this job to pay for her education. "Just keep your head down and do good work," he advised Maria during one of their brief shift overlaps. "Guys like Hutchinson get bored eventually if you don't give them what they're looking for." But Tom's advice, while well-intentioned, failed. To account for the fact that Bradley wasn't seeking mere entertainment, he was feeding a psychological need that grew stronger with each successful humiliation. Maria's refusal to break down or fight back had become a personal challenge that consumed increasing amounts of his attention and creativity. The harassment reached a new level of sophistication when Bradley began using his technical expertise to make Maria's work more difficult. He discovered how to remotely control the building's lighting systems, occasionally leaving her working in dimmed conditions that made cleaning more challenging. He learned to manipulate the VET system to create uncomfortable temperature fluctuations in areas where she worked. These technical sabotage efforts gave him plausible deniability. Building systems malfunctioned all the time, and who would believe that a senior analyst would waste time torturing a janitor? Maria recognized these technical manipulations immediately. Her training in electronic warfare and signals intelligence made Bradley's amateur-level systems interference as obvious as a flare in the darkness. But she also understood that revealing this knowledge would raise questions about her background that she couldn't answer without destroying her carefully constructed identity. Instead, she adapted her work routines to account for Bradley's interference, bringing her own lighting when necessary and adjusting her schedule to minimize exposure to his sabotage efforts. Each adaptation was noted in her mental file on Bradley Hutchinson, building a comprehensive profile of his capabilities, motivations, and psychological vulnerabilities. The breaking point was approaching with the inexorable momentum of a military operation, but neither Bradley nor his colleagues understood the true nature of the forces they had set in motion. They saw a quiet janitor who absorbed abuse without complaint, someone whose background made her powerless to resist their casual cruelty. What they had actually done was wake up something that had been sleeping for 2 years, something that understood warfare at a level they couldn't imagine. Maria's carefully constructed civilian identity was beginning to crack under the pressure. Not from weakness, but from the sheer difficulty of maintaining such rigid self-control in the face of systematic humiliation. The woman who had once led combat operations against enemy forces was being tested by something she had never trained for, the soul-crushing banality of workplace harassment conducted by people who had never faced real consequences for their actions. The storm clouds were gathering, and when they finally broke, the revelation would shatter everything Bradley thought he knew about power, strength, and the true meaning of danger. The campaign against Maria escalated with the methodical precision of a military operation, though Bradley Hutchinson lacked the self-awareness to recognize the irony. What had begun as casual workplace harassment evolved into something more systematic and cruel, driven by Bradley's growing obsession with breaking the quiet woman who refused to acknowledge his superiority. The first major escalation came during a company-wide security briefing led by Director of Security Michael Brennan, a former FBI counterintelligence officer whose paranoia about foreign espionage had made him legendary within the defense contractor community. Brennan had called the meeting to discuss new protocols for handling classified materials, but Bradley saw an opportunity to publicly humiliate Maria while positioning himself as a security-conscious patriot. "I'm concerned about the vetting process for our cleaning staff," Bradley announced during the question period, his voice carrying the tone of someone raising a legitimate security concern. "Some of these people have access to sensitive areas after hours, and I'm not sure we're conducting adequate background checks." Maria had been restocking supplies in the back of the conference room when Bradley spoke, but his words were clearly intended for her. Every head in the room turned to look at the woman in the janitor's uniform, and she felt the familiar weight of unwanted attention. Her training screamed warnings about maintaining operational security, but her cover identity required her to appear oblivious to the implications of Bradley's statement. Brennan's response was predictably thorough and paranoid. "All custodial staff undergo standard background investigations," he said, consulting his tablet. "But you raise a valid point about ongoing monitoring. We should consider implementing additional surveillance protocols." The meeting concluded with Brennan assigning his assistant to conduct a comprehensive review of all support staff security clearances. For Maria, this represented a potential catastrophe. Any deep investigation into Maria Santos's background would reveal inconsistencies that could unravel her carefully constructed identity. But showing concern about the investigation would only reinforce Bradley's implied accusations about her trustworthiness. Bradley's satisfaction was evident as employees filed out of the conference room. He had successfully weaponized the company's security apparatus against Maria while positioning himself as a vigilant protector of classified information. Several colleagues complimented him on his security awareness, and even Director Reeves nodded approvingly at his supposed diligence. "Good catch on the background check issue," said Peterson Hayes, a senior engineer who rarely noticed administrative matters. "You never know who might be trying to get access to our systems." The validation fed Bradley's ego while simultaneously increasing his appetite for additional harassment. If raising security concerns produced such positive responses from management, he reasoned, then he was performing a valuable service by continuing to monitor Maria's activities for suspicious behavior. Over the following days, Bradley began documenting Maria's routine with obsessive detail. He noted which offices she cleaned first, how long she spent in each room, and whether her behavior suggested unusual interest in specific equipment or documents. His observations were recorded in a notebook that he planned to present to security as evidence of his thoroughness, though the real motivation was his growing compulsion to control and monitor Maria's every action. The psychological impact on Maria was profound but invisible. Having spent years operating under hostile surveillance in combat zones, she recognized Bradley's amateur intelligence-gathering efforts immediately. His clumsy attempts at covert observation were so obvious that they would have been laughable if they weren't potentially catastrophic to her security. Every time she caught him watching her work or taking notes about her routine, she had to suppress the tactical instincts that screamed warnings about blown operational cover. But the most dangerous aspect of Bradley's escalation wasn't his surveillance. It was the way he began involving other employees in his harassment campaign. During team meetings and informal conversations, he would make casual comments about Maria's behavior that seemed innocent individually, but collectively painted a picture of someone who didn't belong in a secure environment. Has anyone else noticed how the night janitor seems really interested in the documents people leave on their desks? He would ask during coffee breaks. Maybe I'm being paranoid, but in this business you can't be too careful. These comments created a climate of suspicion that made Maria's work increasingly difficult. Employees who had previously treated her with polite indifference began watching her movements with obvious mistrust. Some started locking their office doors when they left, or making pointed comments about sensitive materials that needed special handling. The hostile atmosphere made every shift feel like navigating a minefield where any misstep could trigger an investigation that would destroy her cover. Dr. Amanda Reeves, despite her focus on technical matters, began to notice the tension surrounding Maria's presence. During a routine walkthrough of her department, she observed several employees quickly closing documents or turning off monitors when Maria approached with her cleaning cart. The behavior struck her as excessive, even by Meridian's paranoid security standards. "Is there some kind of issue with the cleaning staff?" she asked Bradley during a project status meeting. "People seem unusually concerned about operational security during their shifts." Bradley's response was a masterpiece of manipulation, combining apparent concern with subtle accusation. "I've noticed some behaviors that seemed worth monitoring," he said carefully. "Nothing actionable yet, but I think it shows good security awareness that people are being more careful about sensitive materials." Reeves accepted this explanation without further inquiry, but Bradley's words had achieved their intended effect. The department's senior manager was now aware of potential security concerns related to Maria, lending institutional weight to what had started as personal harassment. If any formal complaints were filed, Bradley could claim that his actions were motivated by legitimate security concerns rather than personal animosity. The situation deteriorated further when Bradley discovered that Maria had been helping other custodial staff with technical problems they encountered while cleaning computer labs and server rooms. Tom Rodriguez had mentioned in passing that Maria seemed to understand electronics better than most cleaning personnel, and that she had helped troubleshoot several equipment issues that would have otherwise required expensive technical support. Calls. In Bradley's paranoid worldview, this information confirmed his worst suspicions. Why would a janitor have technical knowledge unless she was gathering intelligence for hostile purposes? He began monitoring Maria's interactions with other employees, looking for evidence that she was using her custodial access to collect classified information. The irony was lost on Bradley that his own behavior obsessively documenting a colleague's routine, conducting unauthorized surveillance, and attempting to turn coworkers into informants exhibited all the characteristics of actual espionage. His actions were far more suspicious than anything Maria had done, but his position within the company hierarchy protected him from the scrutiny he was directing toward her. Maria's situation became even more precarious when Bradley convinced Jennifer Walsh to help with his surveillance efforts. Jennifer's guilt over her failure to intervene in previous harassment incidents made her vulnerable to Bradley's argument that monitoring Maria was actually a form of protection, ensuring that any accusations made against her would be based on documented evidence rather than speculation. "I'm not trying to get her in trouble," Bradley explained with practiced sincerity. "But if there are security concerns, it's better to have clear documentation of her actual behavior. That way, if someone makes accusations, we can show that they're unfounded." Jennifer's technical background made her surveillance more sophisticated than Bradley's clumsy efforts. She had access to building security systems through her work on integrated communications networks, and she began using this access to track Maria's movements throughout the facility. What she discovered contradicted Bradley's suspicions. Maria's routine was remarkably consistent and professional, with no indication of unusual interest in classified materials or suspicious behavior. But instead of reporting these findings to Bradley, Jennifer found herself increasingly uncomfortable with the surveillance operation she had agreed to join. Maria's behavior was so obviously innocent that continuing to monitor her felt like participating in harassment rather than protecting security. The cognitive dissonance between Bradley's accusations and the evidence Jennifer was collecting created growing doubts about the entire enterprise. Meanwhile, Maria's handler at the CIA had begun to notice irregularities in the security environment around Asset 779. Intelligence intercepts suggested increased scrutiny of Meridian Defense Technologies personnel, and there were indications that someone within the company was conducting unauthorized investigations into employee backgrounds. The handler's monthly check-in with Maria was moved up by 2 weeks, and their usual dead drop location was changed as a precautionary measure. During their brief meeting in a parking garage in Crystal City, Maria's handler conveyed the intelligence community's growing concern about her operational security. "There's chatter about someone asking questions," he said quietly, his eyes constantly scanning for surveillance. "Nothing specific to your identity yet, but the environment is becoming hostile. Are you experiencing any unusual attention?" Maria's training demanded complete honesty with her handler, but she also understood that reporting Bradley's harassment would likely result in her extraction from Meridian and the destruction of 2 years of careful identity construction. The intelligence she was gathering in her custodial role had proven valuable to ongoing operations, and losing that access would represent a significant setback to national security interests. "There's some workplace friction," she said carefully. "Nothing that threatens operational security directly, but the environment is becoming more challenging." Her handler's expression suggested that he understood the implications of her carefully chosen words. "Can you maintain your position without compromising your cover?" Maria's answer came without hesitation, despite her growing doubts about the sustainability of her situation. "Yes, the friction is personal rather than professional. I can manage it." But managing it was becoming increasingly difficult as Bradley's harassment campaign expanded beyond simple workplace bullying into something approaching organized persecution. His success in weaponizing the company's security apparatus had emboldened him to pursue more aggressive tactics, while his growing obsession with Maria made him increasingly reckless about the methods he employed. The final escalation came when Bradley gained access to Maria's personnel file through connections in the Human Resources Department. What he found there reinforced his suspicions while providing new ammunition for his harassment campaign. Maria Santos had no employment history prior to joining Meridian. Her educational background consisted entirely of community college courses taken after her hire date, and her emergency contacts were limited to a single name with a disconnected phone number. To Bradley's paranoid mindset, these gaps in Maria's background weren't evidence of a difficult personal history or bureaucratic oversights. They were proof of a deliberately constructed false identity. He began developing theories about Maria's true background, ranging from industrial espionage to foreign intelligence operations. His notebook filled with increasingly elaborate scenarios, explaining how a janitor with suspicious technical knowledge and a fabricated background had gained access to one of the Pentagon's most important contractors. The tragedy of Bradley's investigation was that his conclusions were simultaneously completely wrong and dangerously close to the truth. Maria Santos was indeed a fabricated identity, and the woman using that name did possess classified knowledge that would be valuable to hostile intelligence services. But Bradley's assumptions about her motivations and loyalties were exactly backwards. She was protecting American secrets, not stealing them. As Bradley prepared to escalate his campaign against Maria to formal accusations of espionage, neither he nor his target understood that they were approaching the collision that would destroy both of their carefully constructed worlds. The quiet janitor he was persecuting was about to become the most dangerous person he had ever encountered, and the revelation would come at a cost that neither of them was prepared to pay. The building tensions were about to explode with a force that would reshape everything both of them thought they understood about power, danger, and the true meaning of patriotic service. Bradley's transformation from casual bully to obsessed investigator marked the beginning of what he privately called Operation Spotlight, a systematic campaign to expose what he had convinced himself was a dangerous security breach hiding in plain sight. Armed with the fragments of information from Maria's personnel file, and fueled by validation from colleagues who praised his security consciousness, Bradley began operating with the methodical precision of someone conducting actual counterintelligence work. His first move was to establish a comprehensive surveillance SCHEU that went far beyond his previous casual observations. Bradley began arriving at work earlier and staying later, timing his presence to overlap with Maria's shift changes. He documented her arrival and departure times, noted variations in her routine, and photographed her cleaning cart from multiple angles to identify any equipment that seemed unusual for custodial work. His office became an improvised command center, with building floor plans marked to show Maria's movement patterns and a growing collection of photographs that he planned to present as evidence. The depth of Bradley's obsession became apparent when he began recruiting other employees into his surveillance network. Under the guise of security awareness, he convinced David Park, a junior analyst whose own insecurities made him eager for inclusion in important projects, to monitor Maria's activities during his overtime hours. Park was told that he was participating in a routine security assessment that required documentation of all after-hours personnel activities. "We need to establish baseline behavior patterns for everyone with building access," Bradley explained with the authority of someone speaking from official knowledge. "It's standard protocol for facilities handling classified materials, but it requires discretion to avoid creating workplace tension." Park accepted this explanation without question, partly because it made him feel important and partly because questioning Bradley's authority might jeopardize his own precarious position within the company hierarchy. He began keeping detailed logs of Maria's activities, noting which offices she cleaned first, how long she spent in each room, and whether she seemed to pay unusual attention to specific equipment or documents. The collaboration between Bradley and Park created a feedback loop that amplified both of their suspicions. When Park reported that Maria had spent an extra 10 minutes cleaning the server room, Bradley interpreted this as evidence of intelligence gathering. When Bradley noted that Maria sometimes paused to read safety notices posted in laboratories, Park saw confirmation of suspicious behavior. Neither man considered that a conscientious employee might naturally spend more time in technical areas that required careful cleaning, or that reading posted notices was normal behavior for someone trying to do their job properly. Jennifer Walsh, despite her earlier cooperation with Bradley's surveillance efforts, began to recognize the dangerous direction of his obsession. The evidence she had collected through her monitoring of building Security systems consistently contradicted Bradley's theories about Maria's suspicious behavior. Her access logs showed that Maria's keycard usage followed predictable patterns, consistent with her cleaning responsibilities. Video footage revealed nothing more suspicious than a dedicated employee doing thorough work in challenging conditions. But when Jennifer attempted to share these findings with Bradley, his response revealed how far his paranoia had progressed. Beyond rational analysis. "She's obviously been trained in operational security," he said dismissively. "Professional intelligence operatives know how to maintain cover during routine surveillance. The fact that her behavior appears normal is actually evidence of sophisticated training." This circular logic, where innocuous behavior became proof of guilt and suspicious behavior, would have been even more damning, demonstrated that Bradley had moved beyond legitimate security concerns into the realm of conspiracy theory. No evidence could contradict his conclusions because he had constructed a worldview where any evidence could be interpreted as supporting his preconceived beliefs. The situation became more dangerous when Bradley gained access to Meridian's internal network monitoring systems through his legitimate work on communications protocols. His authorized access to diagnostic tools gave him the ability to track network usage patterns, and he began analyzing data flows during Maria's shifts to identify any unusual activity that might indicate unauthorized information access. What Bradley discovered was far more sophisticated than he expected, but he misinterpreted its significance completely. The network showed occasional anomalous activities during night shift security patches that appeared to install themselves, diagnostic routines that ran outside their scheduled windows, and minor configuration changes that improved system performance. To Bradley's suspicious mind, these activities represented evidence of a skilled hacker using custodial access to penetrate Meridian's classified systems. The reality was that Maria had indeed been making these network modifications, but for reasons that would have horrified Bradley if he had understood them. Her background in electronic warfare and signals intelligence had made her immediately aware of several critical vulnerabilities in Meridian's cybersecurity infrastructure. Rather than reporting these vulnerabilities through official channels, which would have required explanations about how a janitor had identified sophisticated security flaws, she had been quietly patching them during her shifts to prevent potential foreign intelligence penetration. Maria's unauthorized network modifications represented exactly the kind of proactive security work that Bradley claimed to value, but her methods made it impossible for him to recognize her actions as protective rather than hostile. The irony was lost on him that while he was conducting surveillance to identify security threats, Maria was actually neutralizing real threats that his legitimate security training had failed to detect. The escalation reached a critical point when Bradley convinced Director Brennan to authorize a formal security investigation into anomalous network activities during night shifts. Bradley presented his evidence with the confidence of someone who had uncovered a major security breach, unauthorized network access, suspicious behavior by personnel with building access, and patterns of activity that suggested systematic intelligence gathering. Brennan's response was swift and comprehensive. Within hours, Meridian's security department had initiated a full investigation into night shift activities, including comprehensive monitoring of all personnel with after-hours building access. Security cameras were redirected to provide additional coverage of sensitive areas. Network monitoring was enhanced to track all system activities in real time, and protocols were established for conducting surprise inspections of custodial personnel and their equipment. Maria became aware of the enhanced surveillance immediately. Her training in operational security made the increased attention as obvious as searchlights in darkness. Additional cameras had been installed in areas she cleaned regularly. Network monitoring systems were logging activities that had previously gone unnoticed, and security personnel were conducting random patrols that coincidentally intersected with her work schedule. The psychological pressure was enormous. Maria had spent 2 years carefully maintaining her cover identity, while living under the constant fear that discovery would mean death, not just for herself, but potentially for intelligence assets whose lives depended on the secrets she protected. Now she faced the prospect that her cover might be blown not by enemy action or operational failure, but by the petty harassment of a workplace bully who had stumbled onto evidence of her true capabilities. Her handler's next communication reflected the intelligence community's growing alarm about the situation at Meridian. The dead drop location had been changed again, and the message contained updated extraction protocols in case her position became untenable. But extraction would mean abandoning 2 years of intelligence gathering and losing access to information that had already prevented several security breaches at other defense installations. During their emergency meeting in an Arlington metro station parking garage, Maria's handler conveyed the full scope of the intelligence community's concerns. The enhanced security at your location is creating operational risks that extend beyond your individual safety, he said quietly. Other assets in the area are being affected by the increased scrutiny, and we're seeing indications that hostile intelligence services have noticed the unusual activity. The implications were staggering. Bradley's harassment campaign had inadvertently created exactly the kind of security attention that foreign intelligence services monitored for signs of valuable targets. By convincing Meridian to investigate its own personnel, he had potentially exposed not just Maria's cover, but the existence of other intelligence operations in the surrounding area. Maria's response reflected the training that had made her one of the Army's most effective special operations officers. "How long can you give me to resolve this situation?" she asked. Her handler's answer was delivered with the cold precision of someone making life or death calculations. 72 hours maximum. After that, the operational risks become unacceptable, and we'll have to extract you regardless of the consequences. 72 hours to neutralize a threat that had been building for months, using methods that couldn't compromise her cover or create additional security attention. It was the kind of impossible mission that had defined Maria's military career. But this time the enemy wasn't foreign terrorists or hostile military forces. It was a workplace bully whose harassment had accidentally triggered a national security crisis. As Maria returned to Meridian for what might be her final shift, she began planning an operation that would require all of her intelligence training and psychological warfare expertise. Bradley Hutchinson had declared war on someone he thought was a powerless janitor, but he was about to discover that he had actually been hunting one of the most dangerous people he would ever encounter. The next 72 hours would determine whether Maria's cover could be preserved, whether Bradley's investigation could be neutralized, and whether the intelligence operation she protected could continue without catastrophic exposure. She had faced impossible odds in combat zones around the world, but she had never fought a battle where the stakes were simultaneously so personal and so far-reaching. Bradley's surveillance network had inadvertently created the perfect conditions for its own destruction, but neither he nor his colleagues understood that they were no longer hunting their target. They had become the hunted, and their pursuer was someone whose skills had been forged in places where failure meant far more than career consequences or workplace embarrassment. The final phase of Operation Spotlight was about to begin, but the roles of hunter and prey were about to reverse in ways that would shatter everything Bradley thought he understood about power, control, and the true meaning of danger. The breaking point arrived on a Thursday evening that started like any other, but would end with the systematic destruction of everything Maria Santos had built over 2 years of careful invisibility. She arrived for her shift at 10 p.m. to find her cleaning cart had been moved from its usual storage location and searched with amateur thoroughness that left obvious signs of intrusion. Her supplies had been photographed, her equipment inspected, and several items had been tagged with small, adhesive markers that she recognized as standard security inventory procedures. Preparing and narrating This type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maria's training allowed her to catalog the search evidence in seconds while maintaining the confused expression of someone discovering workplace tampering. But inside her mind, tactical alarms were screaming warnings about blown operational security and the need to implement emergency protocols. Someone had moved beyond surveillance into active investigation, and her 72-hour deadline was now effectively reduced to hours. As she restored her cart to proper organization, Maria noticed Bradley watching from his office window with the satisfaction of someone who believed he was closing in on his target. His presence during her shift had become routine, but tonight felt different, more focused, more purposeful. He was no longer conducting casual harassment, but executing what he clearly believed was a sophisticated counterintelligence operation. The first direct confrontation came when Maria began cleaning the 14th floor conference room where Meridian's senior staff held their weekly classified briefings. She had been assigned this room for months without incident, but tonight Bradley emerged from his office with David Park and 2 security personnel she didn't recognize. "I need to see your identification and cleaning authorization for this area," Bradley announced with the authority of someone acting on official orders. His voice carried the confidence that came from institutional backing, and the presence of security personnel suggested that his investigation had gained administrative support. Maria produced her standard building access card and the work assignment sheet that Tom Rodriguez had given her that evening. Both documents were legitimate and properly authorized, but Bradley examined them with the theatrical scrutiny of someone performing for an audience. "This room contains sensitive materials that require special handling protocols," he said, consulting. A tablet that she could see was loaded with building schematics and security procedures. "Have you received specific training for cleaning classified work areas?" The question was a trap designed to expose gaps in Maria's supposed background. A legitimate janitor might reasonably be expected to have such training, but Maria Santos's fabricated work history didn't include the specialized certifications that Meridian required for personnel with access to classified materials. Admitting ignorance would support Bradley's theories about her inadequate vetting, but claiming knowledge she shouldn't possess would raise different but equally dangerous questions. "I clean what I'm assigned to clean," Maria replied with the weary patience of someone accustomed to bureaucratic complications. "If there are special requirements, you'll need to discuss them with my supervisor." Bradley's smile suggested that her response had confirmed his expectations. "That's exactly the problem," he said, turning to address the security personnel. "We have someone with building access who doesn't understand the sensitivity of the material she's handling. That represents a significant security vulnerability." One of the security guards, a former military police officer named Marcus Stevens, seemed uncomfortable with Bradley's theatrical approach to what should have been a routine personnel matter. Stevens had spent enough time in actual security work to recognize the difference between legitimate concerns and personal vendettas, and something about Bradley's obsessive focus on a single employee raised red flags about proportionality and proper procedure. "Sir, if there are concerns about employee clearances, this should probably be handled through official channels," Stevens said diplomatically. "We can document the issue and forward it to the appropriate departments for review." But Bradley had invested too much time and effort in his investigation to accept bureaucratic delay. "The security implications are immediate," he insisted. "We need to determine right now whether this person should have access to sensitive areas." The confrontation escalated when Bradley demanded that Maria empty her cleaning cart for inspection, claiming that security protocols required verification that custodial personnel weren't removing classified materials from the building. This was actually true. Meridian did have such protocols, but they were typically implemented through random inspections rather than targeted harassment of individual employees. Maria faced an impossible choice: complying with Bradley's demand. Would reveal equipment in her cart that no ordinary janitor should possess, specialized tools that serve dual purposes, diagnostic equipment that could interface with classified computer systems, and items that would raise immediate questions about her true capabilities. But refusing the inspection would provide Bradley with evidence of uncooperative behavior that could justify escalating his investigation to formal security channels. She chose compliance, calculating that her best option was to control the inspection process rather than appear to be hiding something. As she began removing items from her cart, Maria provided matter-of-fact explanations for each piece of equipment that carefully omitted any mention of their more sophisticated capabilities. Cleaning solutions, disinfectants, replacement bags. For waste containers, she said in the bored tone of someone reciting an obvious inventory. Scrub brushes, microfiber cloths, glass cleaner, floor polish. But Bradley's technical background allowed him to recognize items that seemed inconsistent with standard custodial work. A digital multimeter that Maria claimed was for checking if electrical outlets are working was far more sophisticated than necessary for such basic tasks. A compact toolkit contained precision instruments that seemed designed for electronics repair rather than facility maintenance. Most suspicious of all was a small tablet computer that Maria described as for reading work schedules and building maps. "This is interesting," Bradley said, examining the tablet with obvious excitement. "This appears to be a ruggedized military-grade device. Why would a janitor need military specification equipment?" The tablet was indeed military hardware. Though Maria's explanation was technically accurate, she did use it for scheduling and navigation. What she couldn't reveal was that it also contained encrypted communication software that allowed her to maintain contact with her intelligence handlers, diagnostic programs that helped her identify and neutralize cybersecurity threats, and classified information that would be invaluable to foreign intelligence services. "It was a gift from my nephew," Maria said, maintaining the calm expression that had served her through countless high-stress situations. "He's in the Army, and he said it would be more durable than regular tablets for work environments." The explanation was plausible enough to satisfy most reasonable inquiries, but Bradley had moved far beyond reasonable skepticism into the realm of conspiracy theory. In his mind, every ordinary explanation was evidence of sophisticated cover story construction, and Maria's calm responses only reinforced his belief that he was dealing with a trained intelligence operative. "We need to examine the contents of this device," Bradley announced, turning to the security personnel as if his authority in the matter was unquestionable. "If she's using military equipment for unauthorized purposes, that represents a serious security violation." This demand crossed a line that Maria couldn't allow him to cross. The tablet contained information that would not only expose her identity but potentially compromise ongoing intelligence operations that had taken years to establish. Allowing Bradley to access its contents would be catastrophic, not just for her personal safety, but for national security interests that extended far beyond Meridian Defense Technologies. "I don't think you have the authority to search my personal property," Maria said quietly, her voice carrying a new quality that made Marcus Stevens instinctively step backward. "If you have specific security concerns, you should contact the appropriate authorities and follow proper procedures." Bradley's response revealed how completely his harassment campaign had consumed his judgment. "I am the appropriate authority," he said with the arrogance of someone who had confused technical expertise with legal power. "This is a secure facility, and I have responsibility for identifying potential security threats." The confrontation had reached a point where any resolution would be destructive. If Maria submitted to Bradley's demands, her cover would be blown and intelligence operations would be compromised. If she continued to resist, Bradley would have evidence of uncooperative behavior that would justify escalating his investigation through official channels that would be even more dangerous to her operational security. But the situation became infinitely worse when Bradley made a tactical error that revealed the true nature of his obsession. In his eagerness to prove his theories about Maria's suspicious background, he grabbed the tablet from her hands without waiting for consent or proper authorization. The physical contact triggered reflexes that Maria had been suppressing for 2 years. Bradley's sudden movement toward her registered as an attack that required immediate neutralization, and her body responded with the muscle memory of countless combat engagements before her conscious mind could reassert control. Her reaction was lightning fast and precise. Bradley found himself face down on the conference room floor, with his arm twisted behind his back in a joint lock that would cause permanent damage if he struggled. The entire sequence had taken less than 2 seconds, and neither the security personnel nor David Park had time to process what they were witnessing. "Don't move," Maria said quietly, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life or death situations. "Any resistance will result in injury." The transformation was complete and irreversible. The quiet janitor who had endured months of harassment without complaint had vanished, replaced by someone whose presence filled the room with the kind of controlled violence that made trained security personnel reach for weapons they suddenly realized would be inadequate. Marcus Stevens, despite his military police background, had never encountered anyone who moved with Maria's combination of speed and precision. The takedown he had just witnessed wasn't the clumsy desperation of someone defending themselves. It was the fluid execution of advanced combat techniques that spoke of extensive training and real-world experience. "Ma'am, I need you to release him immediately," Stevens said, his hand moving toward his sidearm while his mind processed the tactical implications of what he was facing. "This situation needs to be de-escalated before someone gets hurt." Maria's response came without emotion or threat, delivered with the clinical precision of someone explaining inevitable consequences. "Mr. Hutchinson attempted to take my personal property without authorization and made physical contact without consent. I defended myself using appropriate force. He will be released when I'm confident that he won't repeat his aggressive behavior." The tableau held for several seconds that felt like hours. Bradley lay motionless, finally understanding that he had unleashed something far beyond his ability to control. David Park pressed himself against the wall, his notebook of surveillance observations suddenly seeming laughably inadequate for documenting what he was witnessing. Marcus Stevens calculated angles and response options, while recognizing that he was facing someone whose combat skills far exceeded his own. But the most significant moment came when Maria's eyes met those of Jennifer Walsh, who had appeared in the doorway and was recording the entire confrontation on her smartphone. The expression on Maria's face wasn't anger or fear, it was the cold calculation of someone who had just realized that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse completely. The tablet lay on the floor between them, its encrypted contents representing secrets that could reshape everything the witnesses thought they knew about national security, corporate espionage, and the true identity of the woman they had dismissed as just another invisible employee. As Maria slowly released Bradley and stepped back, everyone in the room understood that they had crossed a point of no return. The quiet janitor was gone forever, and whatever emerged from the wreckage of her blown cover would be something none of them were prepared to face. The silence that followed Maria's demonstration of combat capability stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Bradley remained motionless on the conference room floor, his face pressed against the polished surface while his mind struggled to process what had just happened. The woman he had spent months tormenting as a powerless janitor had just neutralized him with techniques that belonged in military training manuals, not corporate facilities management. Marcus Stevens kept his hand near his weapon while his tactical training warred with the growing realization that he was facing someone whose skills far exceeded anything in his experience. 20 years of military police work had taught him to recognize different types of threats, and what he was seeing didn't fit any category he understood. Maria's movements hadn't been the desperate flailing of someone defending themselves. They had been the calculated precision of someone for whom violence was a refined professional skill. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from Mr. Hutchinson and place your hands where I can see them," Stephen said, his voice carrying the authority of his position, while betraying none of his growing uncertainty about the situation's dynamics. Maria complied with deliberate slowness, raising her hands to shoulder height while maintaining the relaxed posture of someone completely comfortable with physical confrontation. Her breathing was controlled and even showing no signs of the adrenaline that should have been flooding her system after such an encounter. This unnatural calm was perhaps more disturbing to Stevens than her combat skills. It suggested someone who had been in similar situations many times before. "Mr. Hutchinson attempted to steal my personal property," Maria said, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone filing a routine report. "When I declined his unauthorized search, he became physically aggressive. I used minimal force necessary to prevent theft and protect myself from further assault." Bradley finally pushed himself up from the floor, his face flushed with embarrassment and growing rage. The humiliation of being overpowered so effortlessly by someone he had dismissed as beneath his notice was overwhelming, but it was compounded by the recognition that several witnesses, including Jennifer Walsh with her smartphone, had documented his complete helplessness. "She attacked me," Bradley shouted, his voice cracking with the strain of trying to reassert some measure of authority over a situation that had spiraled completely beyond his control. "I was conducting a legitimate security inspection, and she assaulted me. This proves everything I've been saying about her." But even as Bradley spoke, everyone in the room could see the obvious problem with his version of events. He showed no signs of injury despite being attacked by someone who had clearly demonstrated the ability to cause serious harm if she had chosen to do so. His arm showed no damage from the joint lock that had immobilized him, and his face bore no marks from being pressed against the floor. If Maria had truly been attempting to harm him, the results would have been far more devastating. David Park, who had been pressed against the wall throughout the confrontation, finally found his voice. "Bradley, maybe we should just call this whole thing off," he said nervously, his surveillance notebook clutched against his chest like a shield. "I mean, nobody got hurt, and maybe there's been some kind of misunderstanding." But Bradley's response revealed how completely his harassment campaign had consumed his judgment and self-awareness. Rather than recognizing that he had crossed dangerous lines and should retreat before the situation deteriorated further, he saw Maria's defensive actions as validation of his conspiracy theories about her true identity. "Don't you see what this proves?" Bradley said, addressing Stevens and the other security personnel with the fervor of someone who believed he had uncovered a major espionage operation. "Normal janitors don't have combat training. She's obviously had specialized instruction, probably military or intelligence services. Everything I've been documenting about her suspicious behavior makes sense now." Jennifer Walsh, who had been recording the entire confrontation, slowly lowered her smartphone while processing the implications of what she had witnessed. Her technical background and access to building security systems had given her a comprehensive view of Maria's activities over the past several months, and everything she had observed contradicted Bradley's theories about hostile intentions or suspicious behavior. But what she had just seen changed everything. The combat skills Maria had displayed weren't the result of casual self-defense classes or fitness training. They represented professional-level expertise that suggested extensive specialized instruction, combined with the military-grade tablet that Bradley had tried to examine. These skills raised legitimate questions about Maria's background that went far beyond workplace harassment. "Bradley," Jennifer said quietly, her voice carrying a new gravity that made everyone in the room turn to look at her. "I think we need to consider the possibility that you're right about her having specialized training. but wrong about why she's here. The implication hung in the air like a revelation waiting to be acknowledged. If Maria possessed military-level combat skills and equipment, but her behavior over months of surveillance had been consistently professional and non-threatening, then the most logical explanation wasn't that she was conducting espionage, it was that she was conducting counter-espionage. Maria watched the group's evolving understanding with the clinical detachment of someone observing a tactical situation develop according to predicted parameters. Her cover identity was irretrievably compromised, but the nature of its destruction might still be managed in ways that protected both her personal safety and the intelligence operations she had been conducting. Stevens, whose military police experience had given him exposure to various types of classified operations, was the first to voice what everyone was beginning to suspect. "Ma'am, I need to ask you directly, are you conducting authorized intelligence activities at this facility?" The question represented exactly the kind of direct inquiry that Maria's training had prepared her to handle, but never in circumstances like these. Standard protocols called for maintaining cover identity until extraction was possible, but extraction was no longer feasible given the number of witnesses and the amount of evidence that had been collected about her true capabilities. "I cannot discuss my background or activities without proper authorization," Maria replied, using the formulaic language that intelligence operatives employed when their cover was blown, but operational security still needed to be maintained. "If you have specific concerns about facility security, I recommend contacting the appropriate federal authorities." Her response was carefully crafted to convey information without actually revealing classified details. By referring to appropriate federal authorities rather than corporate security or local law enforcement, she was indicating that any legitimate inquiry into her identity would need to involve agencies with jurisdiction over intelligence matters. This strongly suggested that she was indeed conducting authorized operations rather than hostile activities. Bradley's reaction to this exchange revealed how completely his paranoia had overwhelmed his analytical capabilities. Rather than recognizing that Maria's professional demeanor and careful language suggested she was working for American intelligence services, he interpreted her responses as evidence of sophisticated enemy training. "She's admitting that she can't discuss her activities," Bradley said triumphantly. "That's exactly what a foreign operative would say if they were caught. We need to detain her immediately and turn her over to the FBI for interrogation." But Stevens's military experience allowed him to recognize the subtle indicators that distinguished American intelligence operatives from foreign agents. Maria's combat techniques had been consistent with U.S. military training methods. Her equipment was American manufactured, and her responses to direct questioning followed protocols that he had seen used by American personnel in sensitive positions. More importantly, Stevens understood the potential consequences of mishandling someone who might be conducting authorized intelligence operations. If Maria was indeed working for American intelligence services, then Bradley's harassment campaign and the current confrontation could represent serious interference with national security activities. "Mr. Hutchinson, I think we need to step back and reassess this situation," Stevens said carefully. "If this individual is conducting authorized activities, then our actions tonight could have significant ramifications that extend far beyond workplace disputes." But before Bradley could respond, the situation took another dramatic turn when Maria's encrypted tablet, which had been lying forgotten on the conference room floor, began emitting a series of quiet beeps that everyone in the room could hear. The device was receiving an emergency communication, and the timing suggested that someone in the intelligence community was already aware of the compromised situation. Maria's expression didn't change, but everyone watching her could see the subtle shift in her posture that indicated heightened alertness. The emergency signal meant that her handlers knew her cover had been blown, and extraction protocols were likely already being implemented. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine whether she could maintain some level of operational security or whether the entire intelligence operation would need to be shut down. Jennifer Walsh, who had been silent while processing the implications of everything she had witnessed, finally spoke with the authority of someone who had reached an important conclusion. "Bradley, I've been monitoring her activities for weeks through the building's security systems, and I need to tell you something important about what I found." The room fell silent as Jennifer prepared to reveal information that would fundamentally change everyone's understanding of the situation. Her access to comprehensive surveillance data had given her a unique perspective on Maria's true activities, and what she had discovered would either vindicate Bradley's suspicions or completely destroy the foundation of his harassment campaign. "She's been protecting us," Jennifer said quietly, her words carrying the weight of someone admitting a significant misjudgment. "All those anomalous network activities that you thought were signs of hacking, she's been fixing security vulnerabilities that our own IT department missed. She's been preventing intrusions, not conducting them." The revelation hit Bradley like a physical blow. Everything he had interpreted as evidence of hostile activity had actually been protective actions designed to strengthen Meridian cybersecurity. The woman he had been persecuting as a foreign operative had been working to protect the very secrets he claimed to be safeguarding. As the implications of Jennifer's revelation sank in, everyone in the room began to understand that they had witnessed something unprecedented. The unmasking of an intelligence operative who had been conducting a deep-cover protective mission while enduring systematic harassment from the very people she was protecting. The emergency signal from Maria's tablet continued its quiet insistence, marking time toward a resolution that would reshape everything they thought they understood about loyalty, sacrifice, and the true meaning of patriotic service. Jennifer Walsh's revelation about Maria's protective activities created a moment of crystalline clarity that shattered months of carefully constructed assumptions. The technical evidence she had compiled through her surveillance of building security systems painted a picture that was the complete inverse of Bradley's conspiracy theories. Instead of conducting espionage, Maria had been preventing it. Instead of exploiting vulnerabilities, she had been eliminating them. Instead of threatening Meridian security, she had been silently strengthening it while enduring systematic harassment from the very people she was protecting. "I have documentation of every network modification she made," Jennifer continued, her voice gaining strength as she realized the full scope of what she needed to reveal. 17 separate security patches that prevented potential intrusions, 11 diagnostic routines that identified hardware vulnerabilities before they could be exploited, and dozens of minor configuration changes that improved system resilience against cyber attacks. She pulled out her own tablet and began displaying screen captures that she had collected during her monitoring of Maria's activities. The technical data was sophisticated enough that only someone with Jennifer's background could have recognized its significance, but its implications were clear to everyone in the room. Maria hadn't been stealing information, she had been protecting it with methods that demonstrated expertise far beyond anything that Meridian's legitimate cybersecurity team possessed. Bradley's face went through a series of expressions as he processed Jennifer's evidence: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally a kind of horrified understanding that his entire campaign against Maria had been based on fundamentally incorrect assumptions. The woman he had been persecuting as a security threat had actually been conducting the kind of advanced protective work that his own department had failed to accomplish. "That's impossible," Bradley said weakly, his voice lacking the conviction that had driven his harassment campaign for months. "Why would she be doing cybersecurity work if she's just a janitor? It doesn't make sense." Marcus Stevens, whose military police background had given him experience with various types of classified operations, understood the implications immediately. "It makes perfect sense if she's not just a janitor," he said quietly. "Deep cover Operatives are often placed in positions that give them access to facilities without drawing attention to their true activities. Custodial work is perfect for that kind of mission. The emergency beeping from Maria's tablet continued its insistent rhythm, and everyone in the room could see that she was calculating response options with the focused intensity of someone facing a tactical decision. Her cover was blown, her mission was compromised, and extraction protocols were likely already being implemented by handlers who were monitoring the situation remotely. But Maria's next action surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of maintaining operational silence until extraction could be arranged, she made a command decision that would reshape the entire situation according to her own strategic objectives rather than following predetermined protocols. My name is Captain Maria Vasquez, United States Army Rangers, currently operating under deep cover assignment for Joint Special Operations Command, she said with the crisp authority of someone accustomed to giving briefings to senior military officials. I have been conducting protective surveillance at this facility for the past 2 years under the operational identity of Maria Santos. The formal introduction hit the room like a tactical nuclear weapon. Everyone present understood that they had just been exposed to classified information that could have profound implications for their own lives and careers. They were no longer witnesses to a workplace dispute. They were now participants in a national security matter that required careful handling to avoid devastating consequences. My mission has been to identify and neutralize cybersecurity threats to defense contractors handling classified communications protocols. Maria continued, her voice carrying the measured cadence of someone delivering an operational briefing. This facility processes information related to military communication systems that are critical to ongoing operations in multiple theaters. Enemy intelligence services have made repeated attempts to penetrate these systems, and my assignment has been to prevent such penetrations while maintaining operational security. Stevens immediately understood the broader implications of what Maria was revealing. If enemy intelligence services were actively targeting Meridian systems, then Bradley's harassment campaign had inadvertently created exactly the kind of internal attention that could compromise ongoing protective operations. By forcing Maria to reveal her identity, he had potentially exposed not just her mission, but other intelligence activities that depended on her work. Captain Vasquez, Stevens said, using her military rank to acknowledge both her authority and the gravity of the situation. What are the security implications of this exposure? Are there immediate threats that we need to address? Maria's response demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking that had made her one of the Army's most effective special operations officers. Rather than focusing on the personal consequences of her blown cover, she was already calculating how to minimize the operational damage and protect ongoing intelligence activities. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The immediate priority is damage assessment and mitigation, she said, her mind clearly working through established protocols for compromised operations. Everyone in this room now has knowledge of classified activities that require appropriate handling. Mr. Hutchinson's investigation has created a paper trail that could expose other protective operations if it's not properly managed. Bradley, who had spent months convincing himself that he was protecting Meridian from security threats, was beginning to understand that his actions had actually created the kind of security crisis he had claimed to be preventing. His surveillance activities, his recruitment of other employees into his investigation, and his documentation of Maria's activities had produced exactly the kind of attention that deep cover operations were designed to avoid. I was trying to protect the company, Bradley said desperately, his voice carrying the hollow ring of someone whose worldview had just collapsed completely. Everything I did was motivated by legitimate security concerns. I thought she was a threat. Maria's response revealed both her tactical acumen and her understanding of human psychology. Rather than expressing anger or condemnation, she addressed Bradley's actions with the analytical detachment of someone conducting an after-action review. "Your observations were actually quite accurate," she said, her voice carrying none of the emotion that Bradley might have expected. "I was conducting activities that appeared suspicious to someone with security training. My equipment was more sophisticated than necessary for custodial work. My behavior patterns included actions that could reasonably be interpreted as intelligence gathering. Your mistake wasn't in recognizing these indicators, it was in assuming that suspicious activity necessarily indicated hostile intent." This acknowledgement of Bradley's analytical capabilities, delivered without condescension or anger, had a profound psychological impact. Instead of being dismissed as a paranoid bully, he was being treated as someone whose observations had been professionally relevant, even though his conclusions had been incorrect. Jennifer Walsh, who had been processing the full implications of her role in Bradley's investigation, stepped forward with the kind of moral courage that had been absent during the months of harassment. "Captain Vasquez, I need to acknowledge that I participated in surveillance activities directed against you. I have access to building security systems, and I used that access to monitor your movements and activities." Her confession represented exactly the kind of honest accountability that intelligence operations required when dealing with compromised security. Rather than attempting to minimize her involvement or shift blame to Bradley, Jennifer was providing the complete disclosure that would be necessary for proper damage assessment. "I understand," Maria replied with the professional courtesy that she might have shown to a colleague during a debriefing. "Your technical capabilities made your surveillance more comprehensive than Mr. Hutchinson's efforts, but your evidence also demonstrated that my activities were protective rather than hostile. That analysis may actually be valuable for ongoing operations." David Park, who had been silent throughout these revelations, finally found the courage to acknowledge his own participation in Bradley's campaign. "I documented your activities as well," he said quietly. "I kept logs of your movements and work patterns because Bradley told me it was part of a routine security assessment." The picture that emerged from these confessions was of a surveillance network that had been far more extensive than Maria had realized. Bradley's investigation had involved multiple people with different types of access to building systems and security data. The compromised operational security was more severe than she had initially calculated, but the intelligence value of their collected data might actually be useful for protective purposes. "Your documentation may help us identify vulnerability patterns that we hadn't previously recognized," Maria said, her voice carrying the tone of someone who had found ways to extract tactical advantage from operational setbacks. "If you've been tracking my activities, you've also been mapping the security weaknesses that I've been addressing. That information could be valuable for ongoing protective operations." The emergency signal from Maria's tablet had stopped, indicating that her handlers had received confirmation that her cover was blown and were implementing appropriate response protocols. But instead of waiting for extraction instructions, Maria was taking proactive steps to manage the situation according to her own assessment of operational requirements. Stevens, whose military experience had given him familiarity with classified operations, understood that they were now participants in a national security matter that required careful handling. "Captain Vasquez, what protocol should we follow to ensure that this situation is handled appropriately? None of us have experience with intelligence operations, and we need guidance about our responsibilities." Maria's answer reflected both her tactical expertise and her understanding of the human factors that would determine whether this crisis could be resolved without devastating consequences for everyone involved. The people in this room weren't trained intelligence operatives. They were civilian employees who had stumbled into classified territory through a combination of workplace harassment and unfortunate circumstances. "The most important thing is complete honesty and cooperation with the investigators who will be arriving shortly," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose recommendations carried the weight of national security imperatives. Everyone who has knowledge of these activities will be interviewed, and any attempt to conceal information or minimize involvement will only make the situation worse for everyone. As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway indicated that additional personnel were arriving. The investigation that would determine the fate of everyone in the room was about to begin, and the consequences would extend far beyond the workplace harassment that had started this entire crisis. Maria straightened her posture and adjusted her uniform, preparing to face whatever came next with the professional composure that had carried her through countless dangerous situations. But this time, she wouldn't be facing the enemy alone. She would be protecting the very people who had unknowingly threatened everything she had worked to accomplish. The footsteps in the hallway belonged to 3 individuals whose arrival transformed the conference room from a site of workplace confrontation into the center of a federal investigation. The first through the door was Colonel Sarah Mitchell, a stern-faced woman in Army dress uniform whose bearing immediately commanded the attention of everyone present. Behind her came Agent David Chun from the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, his civilian suit and neutral expression marking him as someone accustomed to handling sensitive situations with discretion. The third arrival was Dr. Amanda Reeves, whose shocked expression indicated that she was learning about the true nature of her employees' activities for the first time. Colonel Mitchell's eyes swept the room with the tactical assessment of someone evaluating a potentially hostile environment before settling on Maria with a mixture of relief and professional concern. "Captain Vasquez," she said formally, using Maria's military rank to immediately establish the proper chain of command. "We received your emergency signal 23 minutes ago. Please provide a preliminary situation report." Maria straightened to attention, her civilian janitor's uniform seeming to transform into something approaching military bearing as she responded to superior authority. "Colonel, my operational cover has been compromised through systematic surveillance conducted by facility personnel. Present witnesses include the primary investigator, 3 co-conspirators, and 1 security officer. Classified information regarding my mission parameters has been disclosed, and extraction protocols may be necessary." The clinical precision of Maria's report stood in stark contrast to the emotional chaos that had preceded the arrival of federal authorities. Bradley, who had spent months conducting his amateur investigation with growing confidence, now found himself facing the kind of professional scrutiny that made his previous concern seem laughably insignificant. Agent Chun stepped forward with the measured authority of someone accustomed to managing sensitive situations. "I need everyone except Captain Vasquez to exit this room immediately," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet command that made compliance seem like the only reasonable option. "You will be interviewed individually about your knowledge of activities at this facility. Any attempt to discuss this situation with colleagues or family members will be considered obstruction of a federal investigation." But Colonel Mitchell raised a hand to interrupt Chun's standard protocol. "Agent Chun, I think we need to consider the specific circumstances that led to this exposure," she said, her eyes moving between Maria and the assembled witnesses. "Captain Vasquez, do you believe that immediate extraction is necessary, or can this situation be managed in ways that preserve ongoing operations?" The question revealed the complexity of the situation that Maria's blown cover had created. Standard protocols called for immediate extraction when deep cover operatives were exposed, but Maria's protective mission at Meridian was part of a larger intelligence operation that included other facilities and personnel. Shutting down her activities would create security gaps that could take months to replace, potentially exposing critical military communications systems to enemy penetration. Maria's response demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking that had made her one of the Army's most valuable intelligence operatives. "Colonel, I believe the situation can be managed without extraction if the witnesses can be properly briefed and integrated into ongoing security protocols," she said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had found a way to turn operational crisis into tactical advantage. The suggestion was unprecedented in Chun's experience with compromised intelligence operations. Standard procedure was to extract exposed operatives immediately and transfer their responsibilities to replacement personnel who could establish new cover identities. But Maria was proposing something far more complex, converting unwitting witnesses into witting participants in ongoing intelligence activities. Captain Vasquez. That approach would require extensive background investigations and security clearances for all involved personnel, Chun said, his expression indicating skepticism about the feasibility of such an approach. The time and resources required could compromise other operations. But Dr. Reeves, who had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding of the implications for her facility and personnel, stepped forward with information that changed the entire calculation. "Agent Chun, I think you should know that several of the individuals in this room already possess security clearances that may be relevant to this situation," she said, consulting her administrative tablet. "Mr. Hutchinson, Ms. Walsh, and Mr. Stevens all have appropriate clearances for the classified work they perform here." This revelation immediately altered the operational mathematics that Chun and Colonel Mitchell were calculating. If the key witnesses already possess security clearances, then integrating them into ongoing protective operations might be feasible without the extensive delays that would normally be required. Marcus Stevens, whose military police background had given him experience with various types of classified activities, understood the implications immediately. "Ma'am, if Captain Vasquez's mission is critical to facility security, I would be willing to accept reassignment to support ongoing protective operations," he said, addressing Colonel Mitchell with the professionalism of someone volunteering for hazardous duty. His offer represented exactly the kind of solution that could resolve the crisis without destroying 2 years of carefully constructed intelligence activities. Stevens already possessed the security clearances, military experience, and facility access that would make him valuable for protective operations, and his knowledge of the compromised situation made him a logical candidate for expanded responsibilities. Jennifer Walsh, whose technical expertise had made her inadvertently valuable to both Bradley's investigation and Maria's protective activities, stepped forward with a similar offer. "Colonel Mitchell, my access to building security systems has given me comprehensive knowledge of potential vulnerabilities," she said, her voice carrying the determination of someone who had recognized an opportunity to make meaningful contributions to national security. "I would like to volunteer for whatever role would best support ongoing operations." The spontaneous willingness of key witnesses to accept expanded responsibilities created possibilities that none of the federal authorities had anticipated when they responded to Maria's emergency signal. Instead of conducting damage control for a blown intelligence operation, they were witnessing the emergence of an enhanced security team that could provide more comprehensive protection than Maria had been able to accomplish working alone. But the most complex case remained Bradley Hutchinson, whose harassment campaign had inadvertently created the crisis, while simultaneously demonstrating analytical capabilities that could be valuable for intelligence work. His technical expertise was undeniable, his knowledge of the compromised situation was comprehensive, and his existing security clearances made him potentially suitable for expanded responsibilities. The question was whether his psychological profile and demonstrated poor judgment made him suitable for sensitive activities. Colonel Mitchell addressed Bradley directly, her voice carrying the kind of professional assessment that he had never experienced from anyone in authority. "Mr. Hutchinson, your investigation of Captain Vasquez demonstrated both analytical capabilities and serious lapses in judgment," she said, her tone indicating that his future would depend entirely on his response to this evaluation. Your harassment of a decorated Army officer was completely inappropriate, but your recognition of anomalous activities showed legitimate security awareness. Bradley's response would determine whether he became a participant in ongoing intelligence operations or a security liability that required permanent neutralization through legal and administrative means. Everyone in the room understood that his next words would shape not only his own future, but the viability of the enhanced security program that was taking shape around Maria's compromised mission. Colonel Mitchell, I acknowledge that my actions were inappropriate and that I caused significant problems through my harassment of Captain Vasquez, Bradley said, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose entire worldview had been shattered by recent revelations. But I also recognize that my analytical abilities could be valuable for legitimate security purposes if properly directed and supervised. His acknowledgement of wrongdoing while simultaneously asserting his potential value represented exactly the kind of complex response that intelligence operations required from personnel who had been exposed to classified activities through irregular circumstances. Bradley was neither completely culpable nor completely innocent, and his future role would need to reflect that ambiguous status. Agent Chun, who had been evaluating the psychological profiles of all involved personnel, made a recommendation that reflected both security requirements and practical constraints. Colonel Mitchell, I believe we can construct a framework that integrates these individuals into ongoing protective operations while maintaining appropriate supervision and accountability, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone whose recommendations carried significant weight in intelligence circles. The framework that Chun outlined involved formal reassignment of Stevens to security responsibilities that would support Maria's protective mission, integration of Jennifer Walsh's technical capabilities into comprehensive cybersecurity monitoring, and probationary participation by Bradley Hutchinson in analytical activities under close supervision and psychological evaluation. This approach would allow us to maintain operational continuity while actually strengthening protective capabilities, Chun continued, addressing Colonel Mitchell with the kind of strategic analysis that senior military officers expected from intelligence professionals. Captain Vasquez's blown cover becomes an asset rather than a liability if we can properly manage the transition from covert to overt protective operations. Dr. Reeves, whose administrative responsibilities included ensuring that her facility could continue its critical work without disruption, endorsed the proposal with enthusiasm that reflected both patriotic duty and practical necessity. This approach would provide our facility with security capabilities that exceed anything we've had previously, she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had found a way to turn crisis into opportunity. David Park, who had been silent throughout most of these negotiations, finally found the courage to ask about his own status in the emerging security framework. Agent Chun, what about my role in Mr. Hutchinson's investigation? I documented Captain Vasquez's activities and participated in surveillance that compromised her operational security. Chun's response reflected the kind of practical wisdom that intelligence operations required when dealing with complex human factors. Mr. Park, your documentation may actually be valuable for ongoing security analysis, he said, his voice carrying reassurance rather than condemnation. Your participation appears to have been motivated by legitimate security concerns rather than malicious intent, and your analytical contributions could be valuable for future protective operations. The transformation of Bradley's harassment campaign into an enhanced security program represented exactly the kind of tactical adaptation that had made Maria one of the Army's most effective intelligence operatives. By converting her blown cover into an opportunity for expanded protective operations, she had managed to preserve her mission while actually strengthening the security capabilities that protected critical military communication systems. As Colonel Mitchell prepared to implement the enhanced security framework that would emerge from this crisis, Everyone in the room understood that they had participated in something unprecedented: the conversion of workplace harassment into a national security asset that would serve American interests far more effectively than Maria's original covert mission. The investigation was complete, but the real work of protecting America's secrets was just beginning. The transformation of Bradley Hutchinson from workplace bully to probationary intelligence analyst represented one of the most complex rehabilitation challenges that Colonel Mitchell had encountered in 23 years of military service. The psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Patricia Williams, a Defense Department specialist in personnel assessment, revealed a profile that was simultaneously promising and deeply concerning. Subject demonstrates exceptional analytical capabilities and genuine aptitude for pattern recognition, Dr. Williams reported during a classified briefing held in Meridian's secure conference facility. However, his harassment of Captain Vasquez reveals underlying insecurities and authority issues that could compromise operational security if not properly addressed. The rehabilitation program that emerged from this assessment was as unprecedented as the circumstances that had created it. Bradley would undergo 6 months of intensive psychological counseling focused on authority relationships and workplace dynamics, while simultaneously receiving advanced training in counterintelligence techniques and classified information handling. His every action would be monitored by both Dr. Williams and Captain Vasquez herself, creating a supervision structure that prioritized both security requirements and psychological development. Bradley's first day in his new role began with a formal apology that had been scripted by Dr. Williams to address both the personal harm he had caused and the operational damage his actions had created. Standing in the same conference room where his harassment campaign had reached its climax, Bradley faced Maria with an expression that reflected months of psychological examination and genuine remorse. "Captain Vasquez, my behavior toward you was inexcusable and unprofessional," he said, his voice carrying none of the arrogance that had characterized his previous interactions. "I allowed my own insecurities and prejudices to blind me to your professionalism and dedication. My actions endangered both your personal safety and critical national security operations, and I accept full responsibility for the consequences." Maria's response revealed the kind of strategic thinking that had made her one of the Army's most effective intelligence operatives. Rather than accepting Bradley's apology with conventional forgiveness, she chose to use the moment as an educational opportunity that would establish the foundation for their future working relationship. "Mr. Hutchinson, your apology addresses the personal aspects of your behavior, but I'm more interested in your understanding of the operational implications," she said, her voice carrying the professional tone of someone conducting a tactical debriefing. "Can you explain how your actions affected the security environment that we're now working to protect?" The question forced Bradley to demonstrate his grasp of intelligence concepts rather than simply expressing regret about interpersonal conflict. His answer would indicate whether he possessed the analytical sophistication necessary for intelligence work or whether his rehabilitation was merely superficial compliance with administrative requirements. "My investigation created exactly the kind of internal attention that hostile intelligence services monitor for signs of valuable targets," Bradley replied, his response indicating genuine understanding of counterintelligence principles. "By convincing Meridian to enhance its security protocols, I inadvertently signaled that something important was happening here." Enemy analysts could have interpreted the increased security as evidence that this facility was handling more sensitive materials than previously understood. His analysis was both accurate and sophisticated, demonstrating that Bradley's intelligence capabilities could indeed be valuable for protective operations if properly directed. But Maria's follow-up question tested whether he understood the human factors that made intelligence work successful. "How do you plan to avoid similar analytical errors in future assignments?" she asked, her tone indicating that this was the most important question he would face during the rehabilitation process. Bradley's answer reflected months of psychological counseling and genuine self-examination. "I need to separate my personal reactions from analytical judgment," he said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned painful lessons about his own limitations. "My harassment of you wasn't motivated by legitimate security concerns. It was driven by my inability to accept that someone I perceived as subordinate might actually be superior to me in capabilities and dedication." This acknowledgement of the psychological dynamics that had driven his harassment campaign represented exactly the kind of insight that Dr. Williams had been working to develop through intensive counseling. Bradley was beginning to understand that effective intelligence work required the ability to set aside personal prejudices and focus on objective analysis of available evidence. Jennifer Walsh's integration into the enhanced security program proceeded more smoothly, largely because her technical expertise was immediately valuable and her previous surveillance activities had actually produced useful intelligence about facility vulnerabilities. Her comprehensive monitoring of building security systems had identified patterns that neither Maria nor legitimate security personnel had recognized, creating a foundation for more sophisticated protective operations. Ms. Walsh's technical analysis has revealed 17 separate vulnerability patterns that we hadn't previously identified, Agent Chun reported during a weekly progress briefing with Colonel Mitchell. Her integration of multiple data sources has enhanced our situational awareness capabilities beyond what Captain Vasquez could accomplish working alone. Jennifer's success in her new role created a model for how civilian personnel could be effectively integrated into intelligence operations without compromising security requirements. Her existing security clearances and technical background made the transition relatively straightforward, but her psychological profile suggested genuine dedication to national security objectives rather than personal advancement or recognition. Most complex aspect of Jennifer's new responsibilities involved managing the ethical implications of her previous surveillance activities. During her months of monitoring Maria's activities for Bradley's investigation, she had collected information that was now valuable for protective purposes, but had been gathered through questionable means. "I violated Captain Vasquez's privacy and participated in systematic harassment," Jennifer acknowledged during a counseling session with Dr. Williams. "But the data I collected is genuinely useful for ongoing security operations. How do I reconcile the ethical problems with my methods and the operational value of the results?" Dr. Williams's response reflected the kind of moral complexity that intelligence operations frequently encountered when dealing with information obtained through irregular means. "The key is ensuring that future activities are conducted through proper channels with appropriate authorization," she explained. "Your past actions can't be undone, but your future contributions can serve legitimate security purposes that honor the principles you violated previously." Marcus Stevens's transition to enhanced security responsibilities was the most straightforward of all the personnel changes, largely because his military police background had prepared him for exactly the kind of protective operations that Maria's mission required. His understanding of physical security principles complemented Maria's expertise in electronic warfare and signals intelligence, creating a comprehensive security capability that exceeded what either could accomplish individually. Sergeant Stevens brings institutional knowledge about facility security that enhances our operational effectiveness, Maria reported during her weekly briefing with Colonel Mitchell. His familiarity with building layouts, personnel patterns, and existing security protocols allows us to integrate protective measures without disrupting normal business operations. Stevens's military experience also made him valuable for training other security personnel in the advanced techniques that intelligence operations required. His ability to translate Maria's specialized knowledge into procedures that conventional security officers could implement created a force multiplication effect that strengthened protection throughout the facility. But the most significant aspect of Stevens's new role involved serving as a bridge between Maria's intelligence background and the civilian security environment at Meridian. His military police experience had given him exposure to both worlds, making him uniquely qualified to help other personnel understand the requirements and constraints of intelligence operations. David Park's integration into the enhanced security program required the most careful management, largely because his participation in Bradley's harassment campaign had been motivated by insecurity and desire for acceptance rather than genuine security concerns. His analytical capabilities were modest compared to Bradley's technical expertise or Jennifer's systems knowledge, but his documentation of Maria's activities had actually produced valuable intelligence about routine security patterns. Mr. Park's logs provide baseline data about normal facility operations that helps us identify anomalous activities that might indicate hostile penetration attempts. Agent Chun explained a briefing about the enhanced security program's early results. His detailed observations, while originally motivated by harassment, have created a comprehensive picture of facility security that serves legitimate protective purposes. Park's psychological profile suggested genuine remorse about his participation in Bradley's campaign, but also revealed the kind of follower mentality that could be valuable for intelligence operations if properly directed. His willingness to document detailed observations made him useful for routine surveillance activities that didn't require sophisticated analytical capabilities. The most challenging aspect of Park's rehabilitation involved helping him develop the independent judgment necessary for intelligence work. His tendency to follow authority figures without questioning their motivations had made him vulnerable to Bradley's manipulation, but it also suggested that he could be reliable if given clear guidance and appropriate supervision. Dr. Reeves's role in managing the enhanced security program required her to balance administrative responsibilities with operational requirements that she didn't fully understand. Her technical background as an engineer provided some foundation for understanding cybersecurity principles, but intelligence operations involved human factors and psychological considerations that were outside her area of expertise. Dr. Reeves has been remarkably adaptable to the requirements of managing personnel with intelligence responsibilities, Colonel Mitchell noted during a quarterly review of the program's effectiveness. Her engineering background gives her appreciation for systematic approaches to complex problems, and her administrative authority allows her to implement security measures without creating bureaucratic obstacles. The success of the enhanced security program exceeded everyone's initial expectations, largely because the combination of Maria's intelligence expertise with civilian technical capabilities created synergistic effects that strengthened protection beyond what either could accomplish alone. The facility's security posture improved dramatically, while maintaining the operational cover that allowed intelligence activities to continue without drawing hostile attention. But the most significant achievement of the rehabilitation program was the transformation of workplace harassment into genuine collaborative relationships focused on national security objectives. Bradley's evolution from bully to intelligence analyst, Jennifer's transition from unwitting surveillance operative to cybersecurity specialist, and the integration of all personnel into a cohesive protective team demonstrated that even the most problematic situations could be converted into operational assets through proper management and psychological intervention. As the first year of the enhanced security program concluded, everyone involved understood that they had participated in something unprecedented: the conversion of workplace toxicity into one of the most effective protective operations in the defense contractor community. 5 years later, Maria stood before a joint session of Congress, no longer hiding behind the identity of a janitor, but wearing the uniform of a newly promoted lieutenant colonel. The Enhanced Security Integration Protocol, born from workplace Harassment and bureaucratic chaos had become the gold standard for protecting defense contractors nationwide. Bradley Hutchinson, now a respected counterintelligence analyst, sat in the gallery with his teenage daughter Emma, who wore her West Point cadet uniform with pride. The man who had once tormented Maria for her perceived inadequacies now served as her deputy, their partnership a testament to the transformative power of accountability and second chances. The greatest threats to our national security often come not from sophisticated foreign operatives, but from the blind spots created by our own prejudices, Maria testified, her words carrying the authority of someone who had learned this lesson through fire. When we dismiss people based on surface appearances, we create vulnerabilities that our enemies are eager to exploit. Jennifer Walsh, now Director of Cybersecurity for the entire defense contractor network, monitored the hearing from Meridian's command center, where displays showed the real-time protection of dozens of facilities across the country. Marcus Stevens, promoted to Chief of Integrated Security Operations, coordinated with teams that included former custodians, maintenance workers, and support staff whose hidden talents had been discovered through Maria's revolutionary approach. As Maria concluded her testimony, she thought about the janitor's cart she had pushed for 2 years, and how it had carried secrets that changed the world. Sometimes the most dangerous warriors really do hide in plain sight, not as enemies, but as protectors waiting for someone to recognize their true value. What did you think of Maria's incredible journey from invisible janitor to national hero? Stories like these remind us that strength comes in many forms, and the people we overlook might be the ones protecting us most. If this story inspired you, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. We share amazing stories of hidden heroes every week. What's your most incredible never judge a book by its cover experience? Share it in the comments below.